Batman response. The SWAT team dressed up like Batman going door to door. But on the Family Guy, he actually detonates two bombs, like is exactly what happened at the Boston Hoaxathon. But look, as a rule, there are no coincidences on the world stage. That's why I don't think Trump is like literally a rogue, nor do I think Kanye West is anything other than scripted as being out of bounds. Man found fatally shot in Queens crash was convicted killer, JFK assassination author. Now, I don't know what to make of the story other than it looks like a search engine grab for certain terms. We're getting very close to the anniversary or the hoax anniversary of the death of JFK, and I'm looking forward to this one for a couple of reasons. One, the number 1122, the date 1122, has some tie-ins to some of these villains in the BLM narratives. Like, for example, Derek Chauvin, when he was first released on bail from Hennepin County, it was 11:22 a.m. And then you have the officer who's responsible for the death of Breonna Taylor, the one who falsified the warrant. She's going to be sentenced on 11/22. And then you had the Parkland High shooter who was obsessed with Lee Harvey Oswald, who shot up the parade. And that Lee Harvey Oswald 1122 reference, it's really standing out to me. So just letting you know, I'm keeping an eye on 1122. Let's continue. I think I already read this one. The QAnoners have the so-called digital soldiers, which is the term that I believe General Flynn has actually trademarked. Now they are asking God's assistance. This is real Toria Brooke. As multiple social media platforms and the internet have been terrible, I prayed to God to intervene in the digital warfare. I made him a promise I'd read the Bible and make it a priority. What happened? Within 5 minutes, all of the posts about election fraud that wouldn't post before went right through. This is again a digital soldier explaining how God helped post some things about election fraud, but doesn't explain why God didn't grant the red wave. Now here is a clip from Deadpool. A shout out to JT33. I think this is a flat earth reference, not directly, but if you know, you know.
I bet 50 years from now we're best as buddies.
50 years from now, you're very dead. Your entire generation fucked this planet into a coma.
Boom! Spoiler alert.
Planets. 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 Planets.
Nobody says planets like
I
that
bet
sarcastically, other than those who know that planets are something of a joke. I watched the latest launch. Bezos didn't 10, but Blue Origin. Dude Perfect goes to space. It's pretty unwatchable. It's like a micro documentary. You don't see, here's what you don't see. And look, this is true for every single time you've seen any of these billionaires sending people to space. You don't see continuous footage of more than 3 seconds. It's always jump cut. Like you could do this. You and your friends could do this. Get a green screen, put it on your wall, have a trampoline there, jump on the trampoline. And then splice together all the footage when you're in midair and go from one person to the other to the other. Just don't record when they're actually bouncing from the bottom. And you could make it look like they're all in the air. And that's pretty much it. Like I saw the capsule where they simulate the entire launch before they do it. And I'm starting to think that the capsule where the astronauts simulate space travel at Blue Origin is actually one of those birthday party inflatable castles. You know those inflatable castles that the kids go in and they jump around in? I think that's what they use over at Blue Origin headquarters, and they pass it off as being in space. Cringe perfect, says David A. Pryor. Oh yes. Oh yes. I mean, I would play a clip. You could take his word for it, cringe perfect. I'll play a clip. Maybe. I mean, yeah, it's pretty bad. If you've seen one launch, you've seen them all. The point of it is the people who go to space aren't people like you and me. These are people who are completely hardwired into the system. Like, in my view, if you're not an actor, you can't be an actor. And I'm not a good enough actor. I couldn't go to space. News to me, Peter W. says, Tim, Jim Fetzer resubmitted his Sandy Hook case to the Supreme Court this past week. Very good news. Jim Fetzer has not backed down from calling it a DHS drill that has duped the world. Jim Fetzer is holding the line. Tim and Vic 131 says, better late than never. Tim, great to hear you back on air. Yeah, we were only briefly interrupted because we were cut off from more than 4,000 or 5,000 subscribers on the podcasting platforms. I didn't see that one coming, but I'm glad it happened. I'm glad it happened because you wouldn't want to build a big platform that could be taken down so easily. And I'm glad I found out at 4,000 stubs instead of 40,000 or 50,000. And what we are building now is real. We have a solid ground zero. And, whoever was behind the censorship, what you're doing is obviously unethical and wrong. But my objective is to find out, who's really behind censoring the channel, who fraudulently files DMCA copyright takedown notices. And I'm not interested in suing people. That's a waste of time. And most of these trolls aren't collectible. What are they going to do? Pay you in pizza pockets? Used video game consoles? I'm just I want to interview them. If you're a censor, if you're a snowflake, I want to pick what's left of a brain. Infinite Plane Radio.
Yeah, it's Lynn again.
Hey, what's
you
up,
said
Lynn?
You put the call out.
Yes, actually I did.
The notice out.
I put the notice out. I'm glad to hear from you. Everyone here, we have been called by Lynn. In fact, I just read one of your messages about the chemtrails. You shared that video. What's your take on it? Because look, I just don't have enough information to be fully conclusive. But what's your take on this chemtrail thing that you sent me?
Well, we're talking special effects department again. In other words, it's the whole thing about what really happened. Well, it's a special effect. If something is staged, it has to be done convincingly. So, for example, this is why I sent you all that material about 9/11 at the Pentagon. Everybody wanted to talk about the controlled demolitions in Manhattan. But nobody goes to war because of an attack on Larry Silverstein and Frank Lowy, who were the landlords of the complex, so that they could save all that money on asbestos removal with the controlled demolitions. That's not an excuse to, if they had only staged 9/11 with those controlled demolitions in New York, they wouldn't have had a pretext to go to war in Iraq and in Afghanistan. That required the attack on the Pentagon, which, I don't know, always seems to get shuffled to second place in this.
It does. It really does. It's like certain things, of course, are more spectacular and more symbolic. Like I noticed that it's always never forget, but it's always forget. Building 7. They are masters at misdirection for sure.
Right, and also another thing that bothers me about this stuff is people always say predictive programming. Well, the predictive programming for 9/11 was the 1993 World Trade Center truck bomb. Have you ever studied that?
I have studied that one a bit, and again,
the blind sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, and basically the FBI set it up as a sting operation. They hired a former Egyptian army officer named Ahmad Salem, who the New York Times actually covered the trial in great detail. And Ahmad Salem basically became, he was assigned to infiltrate the inner circle around the blind sheikh, and his mosque, I think, was in Jersey City, was where his mosque was. And Ahmad Salem was the one who basically did it per the FBI's instructions, set up the entire operation. He rented the truck, and then he was supposed to secure the explosives for the bombing. Now, this is 1993 we're talking about, right? He was supposed to secure the explosives. And he called his FBI handler and said, hey, look, why don't we replace the explosives with dummy? These people don't know what's going on. We don't want to endanger anybody to stay on the safe side.
Hey, wait, you said
I could,
FBI? You're talking about the Federal Bureau of Instigation, right?
right, intimidate, Federal Bureau of Intimidation, Federal Bureau of PsyOps, whatever you want to call them. And he said to the FBI, well, look, we don't want to have a real bombing go off. I've got the truck. It's all set up. We've got all the inner circle around the blind sheikh, implicated in all this. So, let's replace the explosive with some dummy powder so nothing will actually happen. And his FBI handler said, no, go ahead and set it up with a real explosives, with a real bomb. And, of course, you had a truck bomb go off in the basement garage of the World Trade Center, and it did a little damage. I don't know if anybody was here. Again, we're talking about special effects, because obviously his FBI. Oh, and how do we know this? How do we know that it's not just Ahmad Salam claiming this on the witness stand? On the witness stand during the trial. Well, Ahmad Salam taped the conversation with his FBI handler. He actually got the whole conversation on tape. So we have the FBI implicated in actually instructing their infiltrator, their confidential informant, to secure real explosives so that the special effect would be convincing, so that it really would be a truck bomb.
Okay,
And
okay.
and guess what the judge ruled? The only reason I know all this is because it was all covered in the New York Times. It was no secret. And I couldn't believe that everybody was. I mean, the New York Times, I thought, oh my God, this is it. The FBI's implicated in setting this whole thing up. And you know what the judge ruled? The judge ruled that Ahmad Salam's telephone conversation with his FBI handler was inadmissible as evidence because it violated a law that had been passed in New York State, basically passed to protect corrupt politicians, that you could not record a telephone conversation unless you had the consent of all parties. Are you familiar with this law they have?
Yeah, I am.
No,
And but
if you're being threatened, if you're being blackmailed, if you can catch a public official in a crime, taping them on the telephone, you can't introduce it as evidence in court because it violates this law. And so the judge ruled that taped telephone conversation as inadmissible, and therefore the jury, either they couldn't listen to it because it never got played, or they
how
couldn't consider it in
convenient.
a deliberate.
But
Yeah.
recently it's been brought up that Trump was trying to use the FBI to invent terrorists out of Antifa in Portland. And to me, it's just pretty much the case that that's all they do is they invent stuff. They invent threats left and right, and they didn't 100% play ball with Trump apparently.
Well, that's the right. This is good. Your analysis is really good on this because you consistently point out that the left stages fake active shooter drills and the right stages fake terrorist attacks. So, for example, the Waukesha, this was the sloppiest psyop. If you go and look at this, that Waukesha red SUV that's allegedly crashed into the crowd during the Christmas parade in Waukesha, it was so badly staged that it's obvious. People deconstructed it right away and said, look how phony this is. Also, the crisis acting was really bad. Because they've got the crisis actors screaming, oh my God, oh my, they sound really fake. But this is what incriminates elements of the so-called conservatives or right wing in setting up fake terrorist psyops. That's why I posted all those links, and especially to the Darrell Brooks trial, right? He's allegedly the driver of this red SUV. When the FBI showed up, the SUV was actually, he backed it in, we don't even know that he did it. Whoever placed the damaged SUV that supposedly crashed into these people in the Christmas parade in Waukesha actually backed it into the driveway so the damaged front end was visible. During the trial, there's actually a video of the FBI agent, I guess, testify. They present the tape of the FBI's interview when they came to, maybe they came to arrest Brooks or I don't know what. And what does he say? He says, "Is this some kind of movie? You could hear him say, "Is this some kind of movie?" He
Always with
realized
these.
that
Okay, okay,
that
interesting,
he was being set up. That he was
interesting.
being set up. Either he was being set up or somehow or other he was drawn into the psyop and didn't realize how he was being used. Have you watched any of this Darrell Brooks trial?
Some of it's hysterical, and
Yeah, it's like Judge Judy, right? It's
it
like a
really
Judge
is.
Judy thing.
It really is. His mad dogging the judge, his antics. It was very clownish, and I'm just wondering why is this even on TV like this? This has got to be.
Well,
Um,
like the Alex Jones against the Sandy Hook parents, the same kind of every principle in the book. I mean, if it was on appeal, it should be thrown out. It's ridiculous. Yeah, of course, Jones didn't even get a jury trial on the truth or falsehood of. It's crazy. He was accused of defamation. Typically, there's two stages in a defamation or a libel trial. The first is to determine the truth or the falsehood of whatever was said, and then the second, and then the determination of damage is based on how much damage was done to the plaintiff, to the aggrieved party. And Jones was denied a jury trial for the determination of whether Noah Posner was real, whether any of this was true. The
yes,
judge simply ruled that was, hey, that's already decided it was real. And then he brought in the jury to decide what the penalty would be, which is like, I don't know, 485
I,
billion or whatever.
I'm going to reach out to Jim Fetzer because he's refiling his case with regard to
Well,
this thing.
I just read a piece that Fetzer's lawyers are taking it to the Supreme Court.
I'm very interested in this because when you really get down to it, if you want to be real, Jones's defense was weak and pathetic because if anybody's responsible for making the Sandy Hookers a public face of the tragedy, it wasn't Jones, it was CNN. It's the people who put them in the spotlight. And that's not really advisable anyway. If you're a witness to a massacre or you're a victim, when you're still in shock, to go on camera, there's a lot of reasons why it's bad. But my point is, Jones didn't center his show around them. He platformed the topic, but it's more widespread, which makes me think that he's meant to be the canary in the coal mine, or he's meant to be perceived that way. So everybody's like, look, I don't want my assets frozen. I don't want that to happen to me. And you'll notice, like, I'm not at all fazed by this, and I'm glad that Fetzer isn't either.
Right. Just getting back to a point I was making, because this is very important that people understand. They forget things like, for example, the Oklahoma City bombing. In terms of, people say, well, that's predictive programming. No, it was actually something that was set up by the BATF and the FBI. And here again, we've already discussed the cast of thousands, how it becomes a cast of millions because everybody wants to participate, and the fractal nature of compartmentalized, like NASA's moonwalk fakery. How do you get all these people to participate in it? Because it's so compartmentalized. Each one of them has a part in it. But it's also their willingness to be blind, their willingness not to see things. That's how the entire city of New York could go along with those controlled demolitions on 9/11. I mean, it blows your mind to even think about it.
Well,
Everybody knew. The
you,
firemen, I've been through this. It just makes my head explode. The firemen, the cops, the Port Authority workers, construction workers, everybody knew those were controlled demolitions, but no one would speak up and say so. That's your cast of millions. Now, the other aspect, a Hollywood movie, starring this and starring that, Charlton Heston and Sophia Loren, and with a cast of thousands. I know people nowadays, they don't really remember that because now it's digital effects achieve that cast of thousands.
right,
You
right.
show
Lord of the Rings.
you show this, right? You show the stadium, and they can digitally create that cast of thousands. But back in the day when I was watching movies, when I was growing up, and you probably are old enough to remember real stunts and real, back in the day, you had to hire a cast of thousands. And I come back again to this great movie based on the novel Day of the Locust about Hollywood, where there's a scene where they're staging the Battle of Waterloo for this movie, and they have all this scaffolding set up, but it isn't. I guess it isn't completed, and the movie shows it flashes. You see. There's a pile of signs that says danger, 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 but the signs are all in a pile. they haven't been put up around the scaffolding. And so as they're filming this Battle of Waterloo, this cast of hundreds, I guess, that are staging the battle, they start climbing up the scaffolding and it collapses. Now no one is killed, but there's some people whose legs are broken. So the Hollywood producers, the art director and everybody, they then have to basically they got to get everybody to keep their mouths shut, and then they pay them off. They get the insurance company to cover the injuries from a special effect that didn't work out, where people got hurt. And that's very important to me, because in addition to this cast of thousands and cast of millions, what makes the movie work is convincing special effects. And sometimes a convincing special effect requires a real bomb. In the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, I think it misses the point to say, well, this is predictive programming for 9/11. They staged the first terrorist attack. And you also have the attack on the Cole, the USS Cole, allegedly, and the embassy bombings that occurred in all these events that led up to 9/11 itself, that have to convince people through special effects. That's the only thing that makes the narrative in the movie convincing is special effects.
You know what? I was going to say this too. With regard to 9/11 and the role of planes, look back at how many movies made it a point to have exploding jets. Jet fuel's like a main character in so many action films. And
I saw this.
all
I saw this
conditioning.
in the most annoying movie. I may have talked about this before. It was a series, and some of your listeners may remember it, called Sniper, starring Tom Berenger, who was pretty big in Hollywood for a while. He was in a lot of big films. And I guess the first couple were interesting, but by the third one, it was just getting really tired. It was like, these sequels get kind of ridiculous after a while. And in this sequel to Sniper, and Tom Berenger was in it, I'm pretty sure, there's a scene where a guy hijacks a streetcar in Buenos Aires to escape from the police or somebody. And he's riding the streetcar. He takes over. He grabs it from the streetcar conductor, and he takes over the streetcar, and he's riding the streetcar. It crashes into like a compact car in the road because it goes through it's one of these runaway scenes, a runaway streetcar, and the whole thing explodes. It's the most stupid thing I've ever seen. When I was watching the movie, I remember I was watching the movie with some people, and this is why I'm very you don't want to invite me to a crowd of people to watch a stupid movie.
I bet.
Say, oh yeah, because I'll say, what the hell just happened there? I've seen so many. Why is a streetcar crashing into a vehicle going to create this giant pyrotechnic explosion? That's stupid.
This raises a great point, though, and this is something that Douglas Trumbull, who did the special effects for Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey, commented on. He said that when we transitioned from real actors and real props into CGI, the reality was lost, that the artistry was lost, the quality went down. And I think this is intentional.
It cheapens the special effect, because now, and this is going to really expose them.
Because audiences aren't as discriminating. Now audiences are easier to fool. That's one of the things, too.
You got to dumb down the audience. You really got to dumb down the audience to get most of them to accept it. But the people who are hip, the people who like the people who ever worked as EMTs, or like you, maybe have you had experience in the military or professionally handling dead bodies. You could look at something and say, well, that's stupid. You don't pump the leg. Where is it? You say they were pumping the leg in that scene in.
Yeah, the scene in South Korea at the Halloween party, one of the crisis actors wasn't issued, I guess he wasn't issued a training dummy, and when they started filming the action, they were like, go. He reached for the nearest dummy and started pumping the thigh. And I was like, that's not going to do very much, although I could have used it. I was just back from the gym, and I was like, that might actually be good. But anyway, yeah, he was giving CPR to the thighs of some dummy.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The special effects, if people are smart enough, like the CGI that was released for the Waukesha red SUV and all that, it was done so badly. And one thing they did was they threw around shoes. There's a great video. I posted this on your Facebook page about the actual video that was released that was supposed to show the Waukesha, another one of these trucks out of like the Nice truck, runaway truck. We've had these runaway vehicle events that have occurred over the years. I remember the Nice truck. It wasn't a bombing, was it? The truck just crashed into
It,
people,
it
or
was
was
just a
it actually?
truck, and I'm like, where are the anti-gun people on banning trucks and vans already? But yeah, this is the thing, and the shoes. What's with the shoes at every single event?
Yeah, well, I'm guessing that the shoes are placement of where the actors are supposed to cluster around with one of these dummies, and that's what it looked like to me.
Ooh,
But it's
interesting.
done so sloppily. The special effect is so that's why it's I now I wouldn't know looking at this stuff. I wouldn't know what the hell I was looking at. I have no real experience with I have no experience as an EMT or anything like that. I have no idea. If it weren't for people like you and others, now so many others saying, "Hey, look what they're doing. That makes no sense. It's stupid." I wouldn't know.
Oh
I
yes,
don't
in
know.
fact, it was after the fake killing of a rapper in 2019, where we saw EMTs with black gloves giving one-handed chest compressions to a moving patient on a gurney, threw him in the back of the ambulance, slammed the door, and discontinued the chest pumps. Lack
Right,
of
or
blood. Yeah.
like dragging Ashley Babbitt's body down the steps or whatever. That is stupid stuff that no EMT would do. Dumbass stuff. The people who know better will look at this and say, "Well, that's crazy. That's got to be fake." Or they'll say, "Oh, that's a dummy."
Which is why I reach out for human intel. And listen to what Not Shocked, a commenter says. Viewers used to suspend disbelief for movies. Now it
Right.
applies to the news. Absolutely.
Willful suspension. Yes, willful. From Shakespeare to ancient Greek theater to modern movies and television, all of it depends on this principle of the willful suspension of disbelief on the part of the audience. If you're in a movie theater and it's badly staged and it's poorly done, people in the audience will start throwing popcorn at the screen, and they'll say they'll see, really, if it's that bad, even the audience will see that it's badly done, and they used to do that. Well, that's Mystery Science Theater 3000, or the old Star Trek TV series, which I thought sucked, really, mostly because the special effects sucked. They just weren't very convincing. Not like Kubrick's
The,
2001: A Space Odyssey.
the,
That
the,
had really
it's got to
good
be
stuff.
a,
But
like, what was it, Wuhan? Do you remember the Kung Flu? We called it Kung
yeah,
Flu
people
because,
dropping dead.
yeah, it's like,
Yeah,
that guy
great.
looks like he got kicked by some invisible ghost of like Bruce Lee's ghost is going around kicking people over. We called it Kung
Right.
Flu. And then when it came to America, nobody got knocked over like that.
No, they had to get rid of that. They had to get rid of that because they figured the audience is a little more
Here
sophisticated,
they are,
maybe.
but over
But
there in China or wherever in Wuhan, where they think the old Godzilla movies look legit, they probably thought, "Wow, that's legit." I mean, I'm just saying, as audiences, they're probably less discriminating, as evidenced by their fake moon landing footage. Way worse than ours.
right, nothing undermines the willful suspension of disbelief in the audience more than one bad crisis acting, and we got a lot of that, like Robbie Parker and Wayne Carver, Robbie Parker, Wayne Carver, Gene Rose. We got a lot of bad crisis acting because, as you say, these are people who could never make it in Hollywood for the most part. So they're what do you want me to say? They're not just what do
They're
you call this
gags.
second?
The gags. You got the
Yeah, or
Screen Actors Guild and the Government
government.
Actor Guilds.
Yeah,
The
right,
gags.
right. Bad crisis acting and shitty special effects, cheap, low budget special effects that just don't work unless the audience is really stupid and doesn't know any better. See, unless the audience is gonna buy it. And I remember once I was sitting with my father. This was quite a few years ago, and we were watching one of these movies, and it was kind of cheaply done. And I said, I can't watch something like an explosion or something that there was no reason for. Well, as you say, we were treated to all kinds of movies where cars crashed and blew up. When's the last time you've been in a car accident and seen an explosion?
Right.
I've seen quite a few car accidents. I've been in a few. Nothing ever explodes. It's like maybe they used to talk about. This is an interesting sideline pursuing, but there was the Ford Pinto that there's a big scandal. They said that the placement of the gas tank was causing the thing to explode, when it was involved in accidents because they put the gas tank in the back or somewhere. Do you remember this at
I
all?
heard about this and that it was prone to explode, and you bump it from the side and boom. Was that real, you think?
Not real. Now, who knows? Who knows, really? But this once again falls under the category of bad special effects. If you saw it happen, would you believe it anyway? And yeah, we were watching a movie, and it was just a really shitty special effect. And I said, "Look how stupid that is." I said, "That would never. It wouldn't happen that way in real life." And my father said, "Well, why don't you shut up? We're just trying to enjoy the movie." Well, so how
Okay.
stupid I said, "Dad, how stupid do you have to be to enjoy something that's asinine that insults your intelligence? It insults your
Look, that's
intelligence."
a great point because when you look at a lot of the fakery, it's almost like maybe it's so bad that it deliberately gaslights the more critical consumers of info. It's an insult, literally, to your intelligence. And what that does is it forces you to subjugate your intelligence to the consensus trance. I'm not going to think too hard about this because it's a conflict, the cognitive dissonance. And that's
Right, cognitive dissonance. Yeah.
that's what it
Uh,
does. The only reason why we talk at all is because there's a disharmony between what we're told and what we're experiencing and we're noticing. And those of us that are noticing are experiencing cognitive dissonance induced by terrible special effects.
yes, and it comes back to the most powerful weapon the deep state has is shallowness. The shallowness and stupidity of the audience that isn't bothered by having their intelligence insulted. My God, when you look at 9/11, come on, you really expect everybody to believe that these towers, were turned to rubble from fires caused by jet fuel? I mean, that's ridiculous. It's such an insult to the intelligence of the audience, but the audience was willfully suspended their disbelief at this stupid, bad movie. And that's all 9/11 was. Everybody out there, if anybody asks you, well, what happened on 9/11? You say it was just a movie made for TV news. But movies do have to have reasonably convincing special effects. And what happened at the Pentagon really was an explosion. And we've got a live witness who knew it was an explosion and that there was no plane. She was a Pentagon employee named April Gallup. And she said, and if you ever watch that interview with her, she says, I can't, and she was threatened by the FBI. And she said they did it to brainwash. She said there was no plane at the Pentagon. They did this to brainwash people. They threatened me and tried to intimidate me. She said I was there. I came to work that morning with my daughter, my son, her infant son or daughter. I can't even remember. And as soon as she turned on her computer, the bomb went off. And apparently some of the debris fell on her. She was a little bit, she wasn't, I don't think she was injured, but some of the debris fell on her and everything. And she said it was definitely an explosion that went off. She says in this interview, she was convinced that as soon as she hit the key to start her computer, that's exactly when the bomb went off.
Interesting.
Now,
Now, you might have inadvertent witnesses, and even like after the Vegas shooting, I had some reports that I haven't been able to corroborate of people who were who are in hotels who are signing non-disclosure agreements and given
yes,
cash to keep their mouths shut. And it wouldn't surprise me. I don't even think you'd need to shell out a lot of money. You don't need to give out billions. That's only for the big stars like the Sandy types, the Sandy hookers. But the average actor is desperate for a gig. I think they'll take $100 to lie on TV to the news. And
yeah,
speaking
but
of special effects, the Challenger, they just found like 118
yeah, I
tons of.
heard that.
Okay, now that Challenger thing kind of irks me because people say, "Oh, we all watched it live on TV. The teachers brought." No, I'm sorry, it was not live for the students. They caught it
Right.
on a rebroadcast, and the teachers didn't tell them, which means that the students were shown a snuff film
Yes,
wittingly.
and I listened very carefully to the news report on this. The first thing is they said that it was discovered in the course of making a movie about the Bermuda Triangle. In other words, they're suggesting that wherever the Bermuda Triangle is, that's where they found this piece of
Oh, that's
debris from the
funny.
Challenger. And
Right.
the other thing the news report said was it brought up Kristen McAuliffe. boy, this was the real tearjerker, if you're old enough to remember, was that school teacher, Kristen McAuliffe, who allegedly
Yes,
died.
that's why they put this in all of the classrooms. That way the teachers would be able to say, hey, look, imagine if I went up into space and I blew up. And they had everybody crying, and everybody thought they saw it live, but they didn't see it live. And that's the key here. It was optional. They could have said, hey, do we want to show these children a teacher going into space and then blowing up? Because we know that's what happened. No, we'll just show it to them. I mean, how rotten was that? To me, that's trauma-induced mind control. MK Ultra in the
Yes,
schools.
yes, in the audience. Um, Bad special effect, lousy special effects. But sometimes a special effect requires a real explosion in a Hollywood movie or at 9/11. And why is that important to me? Because real crimes were committed. The FBI threatening a live witness who says, "Oh, there was no plane, something went off. They had some kind of explosion, a bomb here at the Pentagon." The FBI threatened her. They literally threatened her. That's why she went out and gave that interview
Look, they
and blew
will.
the whistle on it.
They will to protect their big lies. A few years
Well,
ago,
that's a crime.
there was like a
That's a
70.
crime.
It is a crime, and there was like this 70-some-year-old who was trying to sell a piece of a moon rock, and NASA sent a SWAT team, and they did a sting. And I thought, why would they forcibly detain somebody? Why would they bring out armed SWAT officers for a moon rock? And it's because if somebody were to look at that under a microscope and figure out it's a piece of petrified wood, it would be very damaging. And I think that they have to protect their narrative at any cost.
Yeah, barring a non-disclosure agreement, really all they can do is either bribe somebody or threaten them to keep their mouth shut. Now that's criminal. That's extortion. That's racketeering. That's and if government agents are involved in this, that is a prosecutable crime. And the other thing, and that's why to me, the real key to 9/11 is not those controlled demolitions in New York City. That only reveals how prostituted the population of that city was, that they went along with, that they were willing to be, every one of them wanted to be in this cast of thousands, to validate that the planes knocked down the towers, which nobody could have really believed. But they managed to induce everybody to participate in that narrative. But at the Pentagon, it was different because there just wasn't many people at the Pentagon that morning. That whole wing of the Pentagon had been vacated for repairs. They made sure there was no. It was the coincidence of it was ridiculous.
Well, they make sure that there are multiple plausible stories, and it's reality fluid. Reality is fluid. Way before gender fluid, we were already reality fluid. Like, let me ask you a question here. There's no wrong
Well,
answer.
just one more thing.
Okay.
One more thing. I don't want to let this go. This Pentagon 9/11 thing. Whoever staged that event at the Pentagon committed high treason. Bottom line. Of course, in my view, Donald Trump committed high treason with Operation Warp Speed, giving hustling through FDA emergency use authorization for this experimental mRNA shot.
And he's not looking too good these days. Hey, let me run this by you though.
But that's high treason. That's high treason, and it's prosecutable. And the
look,
DOD.
if the PSYOP entertainment complex were fully exposed, I think yes, they would say, hey, look, the mass media has been waging war against the populations for generations. There's something inherently. There's got to be some Geneva Convention level prohibitions against psychological warfare, and there used to be. It used to be like Rumsfeld. Oh, we only insert fake news in foreign press. Well, there's no foreign press. It's all.
Well, that's the Smith modernization clause of the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act, which ostensibly made it legal for them to propagandize the American people. During the Cold War, supposedly they had prohibited that. They could say you could target anybody outside the United States with lies and propaganda. But that was called the Smith-Mundt Act. But then the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act basically repealed that Smith-Mundt Act and said, well, now you could target the American people just like anybody else. Just like people in the Middle East or Europe or Africa. You can plant false stories, you can do whatever you want, and you could stage fake events, and it isn't really, for propaganda purposes, and it isn't really criminal. But I still say that staging a bombing at the Pentagon to make it to propagate the narrative that a plane crashed there, a hijacked plane, that is high treason. And everybody who knew about that and participated in that can be arrested tomorrow for high
Yeah, I would
treason.
say so. I would say so because yeah, it's a bombing. It's a bombing. It doesn't matter what the
Yes,
false
it's
explanation
a
was.
special effect. It's a special effect,
Now,
and they did it.
there's no wrong answer here, but in your take, what was most likely the cause? Because this is now a debate again. The cause of George Floyd's death, was it knee on the neck, fentanyl, misinformation, or climate change?
Climate change.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, I can't breathe. That's what I'm
Right.
saying. It's climate change.
Right.
I was gonna say chemtrails, but
Yeah, chemtrails. Well, to me, I don't presume to know, what's going on there. Are they spraying something? What's happening? I just know it's a special effect. Now, what is the intention of the special effect? Is it like that scene, that classic scene in The Wizard of Oz, where the Wicked Witch of the West is flying around on her broomstick, painting the sky with the phrase "Surrender, Dorothy"? I
ooh,
think we all remember
interesting.
that as kids.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that till
Right.
just now, but that's a very powerful image there.
Yeah, that's what I think of when I see obvious. I don't want to call it. Well, people say it's geoengineering going on. That remains to be proven. Of course, they're out there in the open. Bill Gates is saying, "Oh yeah, of course we want to be able to shut the sun out and reflect the sun and all that," and that would require the spraying of, I guess, some kind of high particleized metallic stuff like aluminum
Yes,
or
stratospheric
barium.
aerosol injections with
Yeah,
vitamin. I think it's gonna be
exactly.
vitamin. Yeah, barium and
But
aluminum.
they can spray chemicals in the sky that will then fall onto crops or into the water, and or
Look, I
who knows?
understand why people even find this plausible.
A
Even if you
vaccine, maybe.
like, look about this. Like,
Right?
if they're willing to allow drugs in to get you, like if they're willing to, it's like public health isn't the main thing. Whatever they say, I understand why people believe the chemtrail thing. I just have a lot of questions about it. But I understand why people find certain things plausible. I understand why people think that Hillary Clinton wears the faces of dead sacrificial victims. It's like they give you every reason to believe these things.
Yes. Yeah. It's almost like, can you really rule anything out? Because you know how sick and twisted these people are, and from time to time they are caught doing this crazy shit. Like, for example, the Nexium cult there in upstate New York. I mean, it really was this crazy sex slave cult, and a lot of high-profile people were involved in it, including one of the Bronfman heiresses. Um, how much of this, what was really going on at Jeffrey Epstein's island? Man, the stuff I read about this blows my mind. You know, and they had compromised politicians and prime ministers and Hollywood producers and scientists even. So yeah, there's definitely something there for sure. But what actually was going on? It probably was criminal, and it probably did involve. If not outright pedophilia, certainly, sex with underage girls and stuff like, I don't know what's.
Well, what was it? Dollar Vigilante went out there and he found that apparently that whole temple thing was a big prop. Like it's difficult to say where the theater
Well,
ends
it
and the
was a
reality
storage shed.
begins,
It
but
could have been a storage shed, right?
regardless, the world stage psyops, as you said, it's important to understand, what's the meaning behind the special effect, and how is it supposed to affect reality, which is what they do it for. It's a force
Well,
multiplier.
you got into this with all the symbolism that Kubrick embedded in The Shining, the twins, the two twins standing there, and this is a very important point I want to make, because in the post-literate society, and I encounter this a lot, people talk about the movie as though that's the original narrative, but 9 out of 10 movies used to be based on novels, sometimes very old novels. And so you then have to look and see what did they add to the movie or change in the movie script that's different from what was in the original novel or story.
Yes,
Because
that's
that's
what
very
gives it
deliberate.
away. In fact, you mentioned Kubrick, and just the other day, the daughter of Stanley Kubrick was hanging out with Alex Jones. And I find that to be a very curious pairing when I think about the
That's creepy.
significance of Kubrick in the big picture.
In a post literate society, and here again, the weapon of the deep state is shallowness. How many people out there have seen a movie and they're convinced that's the original narrative and they've never read the book? Me, I'm the kind of person that, and that has to do with, novels by John Grisham, Stephen King, Frederick Forsyth, John Le Carre, Graham Greene. Everybody's seen the movie, but only certain people have read the original novel, and they know and sometimes very, very significant changes are made to the script. For example, Ernest Hemingway, classic American writer. One of his stories is called The Snows of Kilimanjaro. And at the end of it, the protagonist he's got a gangrenous wound, and he's out there in the African bush, and they can't get medical help to him, and he dies at the end of the short story. But David, I guess it must have been Daryl Zanuck or David Selznick, whoever produced the movie. They didn't like that. They didn't think Hollywood, audiences would like that. And so at the end, and this was a big movie starring Gregory Peck, Susan Hayward. It was a big movie because everybody would go out to see a movie based on a Hemingway novel, right? The Sun Also Rises, A Farewell to Arms. These were classic novels that Hemingway wrote, just as they would go out to see a movie based on a Steinbeck novel like The Grapes of Wrath. One of the things that really obsessed me for a while is I would critique a movie and say, well, how much did they distort or change the original novel or short story to make this movie? And sometimes
Yes,
it's
that
pretty
used to make me
outrageous.
mad. Like, okay, American Psycho. A lot of people know the movie. The movie's incredibly
Burt
shallow.
Easton Ellis, is that Burt Easton Ellis, or
Yeah,
am I thinking
Yeah, it's Bret Easton
Bret
Ellis,
Easton
Less
Ellis?
Than
Okay,
Zero. You've probably heard of, I mean, a lot
right,
of his
Less Than
stuff
Zero.
turned into movies, but the American Psycho book is inside the guy's head, stream of consciousness for hundreds of pages, and it's very nuanced, very erratic. It's how you imagine an OCD psychopathic killer would think. But in the movies, you only see the surface, which is the whole point of the book, that the people around him don't have any insight, that they only see the surface. And the whole book is really an attack on, superficial society, etc. And he's just reflecting it. But when you watch the movie, you see a horror film, just a guy killing people. You miss the internal process. And that to me is what
Right.
film generally does. Although recently I've been impressed with Netflix and other streaming services' ability to take stories and extend them out beyond the confines of a feature film and get some more of the nuance out.
Well, I always, a big thing with me is how faithful to the novel is the movie. So, for example, Martin Scorsese made, and I really appreciate it when the director goes out of his way to be faithful to the original novel. So, for example, Martin Scorsese made a film called The Age of Innocence with Daniel Day-Lewis and Michelle Pfeiffer and Winona Ryder or whatever her name is. Um, and it really is. I had read the novel many years ago by Edith Wharton, and I got to hand it to Scorsese. He went out of his way to really stick exactly to the novel. When Kubrick made Barry Lyndon, which was a terrible flop here in the United States, it's like a 3-hour film, but I love it. I got to say, Kubrick was really, how do you say it? He was very particular about sticking exactly to the text of the original novel because it's a classic novel. In other words, when the director is saying, hey, my audience is literate enough that they're going to resent it if I change the end of this. Well, in the case of Hemingway's short story, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, it has a very tragic ending where where the protagonist dies of gangrene out there in the African bush. The doctors don't get to him in time or whatever. But as I say, when Hollywood made the film, they figured audiences wouldn't like that. Audiences like a happy ending. And so at the end, he's rescued and he survives. He lives. And Hemingway was so disgusted by this because he wrote the original story. He said, "I don't want you putting my name on this movie and saying based on the story by Ernest Hemingway." He said, "You should call it The Snows of Kilimanjaro by Daryl Zanuck." In other words, it's not my story. You completely changed the story. And that, once again, what is the weapon of the deep state, which is Hollywood? It's shallowness. It's they're more and more, because they've gotten so cheap and so shoddy. They don't care if there are people in the audience who say, "Well, wait a minute, I read Great Expectations, or I read Oliver Twist, or David Copperfield, or A Tale of
No,
Two Cities," and
it's
that's not what happens in the
I've
novel.
noticed
What did you
too.
change that for?
Like take the movie Blade Runner, which is well known for the cinematography, the mood, the atmospheric,
Right, that's based
the
on Philip K. Dick's "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep."
yes, and they're hunting down the replicants that are so close to human that you can't tell the difference. But
Genetically engineered, right?
yeah, and the original movie has like certain iconic scenes. It's Harrison Ford. It's kind of a slow brooding movie. I like the book, but they remade it and they replaced everything that was good about it with video game level cheesy special effects. They destroyed, I think, was it Ridley Scott? Just like I just
Well,
constantly see this whenever they bring back these sequels with these new
yeah.
special effects, they kill the soul of what was originally organic effects and real people.
I call that attenuation. By that I mean, do people still use fax machines? I hated fax machines. When I was still working, we always had to send documents over using fax machines. And the problem with a fax machine is each successive copy, like the old Xerox machines, each successive copy gets shittier and shittier and shittier until finally you could barely read the stupid thing. And I call that attenuation. The signal is so weak by the time, because it's been shallowed and shallowed and shallowed. Finally, you can't even tell what the original was. And that's what they do with with entertainment. It's what they do with the narratives that make up propaganda, agitprop, and TV news. You see attenuation, and sometimes the original narrative is completely lost. But once again, this is all that willful suspension of disbelief that they're counting on in the audience. The audience is so shallow that most of them won't even be aware of it. Or if
Yes,
they are, they won't care.
the
They won't care.
TikTokification of the American mind. I think they've got everyone distracted enough to where one minute we're worried that we're going to be nuked into Judgment Day, Armageddon, the world's going to end. The next day it's collective outrage against Kanye West. And then the next day it's Pelosi. And they're making light of an attack on an elderly man. Like you can see how definitely they have weaponized shallowness. You nailed it.
And that's this. When you think of how these narratives, you go back, like, for example, the original Sandy Hook narrative was completely different from what First, they claimed there was a guy in camo running around in the woods that the police picked up. Initially, they had the news showed them arresting Ryan Lanza, but he said this is a hoax. And then they said, but Adam Lanza apparently had Ryan Lanza's ID on him. That they claimed that. As the narrative progressed, and the same thing with the Boston Marathon bombing was a great example of this. As the narrative, day by day, week by week, month by month by month, we said, well, we didn't really mean this, we meant that, and oh, we misreported this. We here's what really happened. It's like that fax machine that's copying the original over. It just attenuates. It gets weaker and weaker and weaker until very little of the original narrative is even left. And there's a hell of a lot of cognitive dissonance involved in that, because anybody with a thinking brain will look at that and say, well, how could you
It's
possibly be
because,
mistaken about
yeah,
that?
we're reality fluid and they're still solidifying it. And, the day of the Parkland event, there was some footage from like, David Hogg is in a closet and he's interviewing somebody. He says, okay, here we are, Parkland High School. It's your first school shooting. How do you feel? It's 9:30 a.m. And she's like, I'm very scared. were hiding in the closet. Then you find out that the
He
shooting
wasn't
happened
even
in
there.
the shooting happened in the afternoon, and he wasn't there.
Right.
He had still ride his bicycle over there. But it's like, wait, 9:30 in the morning or some early in the morning shooting, but then it happens in the afternoon. Then you find out there was a drill earlier in the day.
And this explains this psyop called the Mandela effect, which was very deliberately engineered to see just how shallow they could get with people's memory. In a post-literate society, where the memory people have of the narrative is from they saw it on a movie or they saw it on a sampler on the wall where the lion is laying down next to the lamb, but they never actually read the passage in the Bible which says a wolf. It doesn't never said a lion, never. But lion with the lamb is alliterative. That is to say, it sounds better to say the lion shall lay down with the lamb than the wolf with the lamb, because it's two L's. It's more poetic. And so the sampler that a lot of people used to have on their wall, that sort of picture had a lion with the lamb, but that's not what the original text in the book of Isaiah says, if you recall it. This is one of my favorite passages. I studied it in the original Hebrew, and then also the Greek version, the Septuagint, where they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Lo yisa goy al goy charev. Nation, goy means nation, referring to all the nations other than Israel. Lo yisa goy al goy charev, lo yilmedu od milchama, is the original Hebrew. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And then it goes on to talk about the wolf shall lay down with the lamb. This was a very familiar passage to me. And when I heard these Mandela idiots, Brian Stavely, if you're listening, I'm directing this at you. I'll bet you never fucking took one look at the Bible, Brian Stavely, because I know you were a major fan of professional wrestling. Boy, did it disappoint me to see your personal page on Facebook with you beaming, holding one of these WWE wrestling belts. And it dawned on me that you were a fan of WWE professional wrestling, which I really don't like. I've never liked it because I don't think it should be called wrestling. It really bothered me that the NCAA, I had, let me talk about this a little bit.
Well,
Do you mind if I kind of
yeah,
go off on a
but
tangent on it?
one point here
It's about the corruption of values. It really
okay,
is,
because
the Mandela.
if somebody's going to comment on the Bible and they haven't read it, it's like they don't have
Right.
any. You obviously do, and specifically though, there's a Mandela effect about Dolly having braces in a show called Moonraker, and he admitted he has never seen the movie. He's making his
Well, he wasn't
entire
even around. Probably wasn't even born yet when the original movie was made.
but he was making the
Maybe
judgment, as most people do, based on that one little clip. Do you remember? And it's like, wait, there's an entire movie, and you have to look at the entire movie. And does she have braces throughout? But when he said he hadn't watched the movie, I thought, you really, if you're going to be the guru on this topic, you got to watch the material that you're sourcing.
Yeah, they all pretended to be shocked about a passage. Actually, there's two places where this occurs. One is in the book of Samuel, I think. I think it was in the book of Samuel, or it might have been Judges, show of team. I can't, where the God commands the Israelites to wipe out this rival tribe, this rival nation, and kill. It might have been Saul actually who was commanded to do this, and because he spared the stock animals, and I might have taken slaves. He had been, and Prophet Samuel had told Saul, God has ordered you to destroy everything, kill everything. Or I think it says, well, everything that pisses against a wall, which is a very common expression in the ancient world for males, right? The only people capable of pissing against the wall are males, humans, dogs, whatever. And it wouldn't have been, I remember this passage from when I studied it in Hebrew school. But Brian Stavely had people in his group with this Mandela effect stuff, and they said, "Oh, this was never in our Bible. To pisses against the wall." Well, yes, it was. You
What
just
about
never read the
unicorns?
Bible.
They
You
say
shallow.
unicorns weren't in the Bible. Now they are. It's a Mandela effect. And then I looked a little deeper, and some say that any
Yeah.
reference to a unicorn is a reference to the rhinoceros. What do you think,
Well, that's
rhinoceroses
one.
or unicorns?
Yeah, that's one plausible explanation. This is, of course, a part of this is just ignorance. as I say, in the post-literate society, most people never read the original text of it. They just saw it in a movie, or they saw it in a sampler on the wall, right? They never actually read the text or studied it. So it's that level of shallowness in the post-literate
Oh, my
society.
favorite Bible scholar is Russian Vids, who can't remember any Bible verses, but he knows all the Meatloaf lyrics. He closes every
I,
video with a Meatloaf lyric, and I'm like, wait, you're the guy who says the Bible's the standard for the truther. If you don't cite the Bible, you're not in truth. It's like, well, then recite some Bible verses. I think we're all tired of Meatloaf.
right, and these are people who have never ever read Caesar's Messiah by Joseph Atwill, really brilliant biblical scholar. I mean, he's really parsed the Greek right down to every letter, and it shows how shallow people's memory is. Because, well, it's interesting because his explanation for the creation of the gospel myth, as he would call it, as what he calls a typology. That is to say, for example, Herod ordering that all the male children born on a particular day should be slaughtered because one of them is prophesied to be the Messiah. Well, that's an exact replica of the story in Exodus, where, it's either in Exodus where Pharaoh orders the killing of the firstborn, and then later, when Moses asks God, it calls down these plagues, it's like 10 plagues or 12 plagues on the Egyptians. The very last plague is that their firstborn all the male babies should die, or I guess all the babies should die, or the male baby should die. And the Israelites were told, the children of Israel that were told to the lamb that they slaughtered to eat for the Passover meal, their last meal before they left Egypt, they were supposed to smear the blood on the door so that the angel of death would bypass their door and only kill the Egyptian first. That's a terrible story when you think about it. But what Joseph Atwill is saying is, well, what they've done is the people who constructed the gospel, these Hellenized Jews of the Tiberius Alexander's family. The Alexanders were the Rothschilds of their day in the Roman Empire. They were the richest family in the empire, headquartered in Alexandria, Egypt, and they probably financed a lot of the construction of the gospel narrative. But they knew, but remember, a lot of their audience was illiterate and had to have this text read to
Oh,
them
that's an interesting
at the
point.
synagogue. They
The
didn't right.
illiteracy
They
of it all, because you went from
right.
graven images, idols, to Holy Scripture, Holy Writ, and that's kind of interesting because I would say that the average news consumer today is visually illiterate, and they need the
Oh, for
pundits
sure.
to tell them what's real and what's not real.
And they're historically illiterate as well. Most of them don't even remember the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, or maybe they were too young to remember it. And to say, well, all that
Oh
happened was
God, you're right. I mean,
they
I listened to
upgraded the
some.
movie script for 9/11.
I
Um,
I saw a TikToker say, "Oh, 9/11, isn't that?" Because they were talking about Osama bin Laden and where he was interred, and some commenter was like, "I thought Osama bin Laden was in the first plane.
right.
He hijacked the plane. He blew it up."
Yeah. Well,
And you know what? I was
That's the
happy then.
shallowness of memory. It's memory Boy, more Mandela crap. The memory is so shallow that you can use a typology. You can take these old mythical themes that were already kind of familiar. They're floating around in people's consciousness because they heard these stories told in another context. And if you change a detail here or there, well, instead of Pharaoh, it's Herod the Great, and instead of the Jewish firstborn in Egypt, this time it's in the city of Bethlehem, or I guess in Judea.
Yeah, you're talking about the intentional rhyming of your propaganda, aligning it with previous stories. We talk about
Right.
history rhyming, and that's what Joseph Atwill was saying, is that they constructed the Gospels to perfectly rhyme and coincide and fulfill prophecies. And what is predictive programming but preparation for
Right.
the fulfillment of it in the news as a form of prophecy in a way?
So one could say that the '93 WTC FBI sting operation with this truck bomb in the basement, you could say it was predictive programming, but at the same time, there's typology involved because once again we have the Islamic terrorists, right? Except this time on 9/11, these same Islamic terrorists are flying planes into the towers. Oh yeah, weren't they the ones who tried to truck bomb the WTC? You know, and interestingly enough, on the morning of 9/11, I remember every detail of the reporting of that because I knew it was. First of all, I knew it was an inside job. Here's when I knew it was an inside job. I was sitting there when I got to work that morning. It was Howard Stern who announced the first hit. He said, "Oh, a plane's crashed into the World Trade Center. It must be an accident." And then he said, "Oh, it looks like." And then when I got to work, they were evacuating the building that I worked in. So it was a beautiful day. So I said, well, I figured it would be another hour before people returned into the building. So I went around the corner to a coffee shop there on Baltimore Street where, I had a bunch of friends there that worked as baristas and, used to hang out there. And I was sitting outside. They had tables set up outside. Sitting outside, drinking my cappuccino. And one of the baristas, they knew I was following the narrative. One of the baristas ran out and said, "Hey, Lynn, they say a truck bomb just went off at the Pentagon." A truck bomb went off at the Pentagon. I said, "What?" And then 10 minutes later, the same barista came out and said, "Well, now they changed the story. They just said a plane crashed into the Pentagon." I stood right up and I said, "Well, that's impossible." They said, "Yeah, a Boeing commercial jet." I said, "That's ridiculous. NORAD wouldn't let a Boeing commercial jet anywhere near Washington, D.C. That's insane." I said, "And if that happened, oh my God, the Joint Chiefs of Staff is going to have to talk about Pearl Harbor, because at Pearl Harbor, after Pearl Harbor, they court-martialed Admiral Kimmel and Major General Short, who were the top military commanders there. They took the rap. They were scapegoated for this horrible, unthinkable failure at Pearl Harbor."
Pearl Harbor, 12/7. Building 1, Building 2, Building 7. There's some interesting Pearl Harbor 9/11 connections. And yes, 9/11 was also another Pearl Harbor event. Pearl Harbor was called Operation AI, which is 19, like 19 hijackers. All these events are predictive
I
programming for one
swear.
another. They're part of a sequence. And I think that this is,
I went home.
yeah.
I stood up when they said, "Oh no, they're saying a big fat Boeing commercial jet just crashed into the wall." I said, "That's impossible." I said, "There's no way NORAD would have allowed that to happen. And it's the most heavily guarded fortress on planet Earth, that Pentagon. That's insane. The whole federal district is a grid." I said, "This has got to be an inside job, and they're going to have to scapegoat some people for this because it's unthinkable that that would have been allowed to happen." I said, "And that means the Secretary of Defense, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, NORAD commanders, they're all going to have to resign or be court-martialed." And I went home that night convinced that we were going to see resignations and court, that somebody was going to have to take the rap for this, the blame for this. I turned on C-SPAN, and lo and behold, John Warner and Carl Levin, who were the majority and minority chairs of the Armed Services Committee, they just went through this pro forma proceeding where they formalized the appointment of the acting head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, who was Meyer. General. Boy, I can't believe I'm forgetting all this. Air Force General Richard Myers. The guy who should have been court-martialed for this. They were congratulating him on his handling of the situation, and they said, and they officially approved because he had been. It's very interesting.
But it's very maddening because it doesn't. No one responded like they should have, and
Right, it was
that's
insane.
it's
It
insane
was
for people
insane.
like you who pay attention. Most people just
Yeah, the
think,
people who pay attention, it was insane. But most people, those dirty Arabs, they're dirty Muslims. They did it to us. Well, wait a minute, dude. Aren't you looking at what's happening here? Why are you allowed? See, this is what just. Oh, I thought my
and
head
of
was going
course
to explode.
their frame of reference is things they've seen on TV, bad guys that have been
Yes.
presented by Hollywood, and look how smoothly they've transitioned from Quran radicals to QAnon radicals, from Taliban to MAGA band, from ISIS to I guess the MAGA is like the American ISIS, the white Al Qaeda And of course, we're looking
Blue
at, I
Eye,
think, a
yeah, right.
template, 100% a template.
Vanilla ISIS,
Yeah,
yeah,
Vanilla
Vanilla ISIS
ISIS. Al Qaeda
and Blue Eyed
means
Al Qaeda.
the base. It means the base or the foundation.
It also, by the way, means the toilet.
Interesting. Okay,
Yes,
well,
because it's where you
the
sit, and the base where you sit. You know, it's really that's. I'm told that in Arabic it has kind of a dual meaning. You know,
well, the
the
white
base is
nationalists that were supposedly planning to start attacking the power grid in the Pacific Northwest also go by the base. I'm like, wait, the white Al Qaeda, like you can see how it's 100% a template, and they can engineer, manufacture a bad guy in the mind of the public, and then they manifest it. And right now, the terrorist of the day is the QAnon terrorist. They don't consider the environmentalists terrorists, the ones who basically block roads, set themselves on fire. But no, the public's primed for the next Timothy McVeigh.
so they reuse the same scripts over and over, but they change a detail here or there. These
Oh, it's clever.
runaway.
I mean, think about this, Kate. If Osama bin Laden's big day was 9/11, it's kind of interesting because the white version of Osama bin Laden would be like Timothy McVeigh, and he was executed on
Absolutely,
a 6/11
absolutely.
at the age of 33, 90 days before 9/11. But you have all the same symbols, and 6/11, 9/11, it's an inversion. One's an external threat, an alien terrorist. The other one is domestic, violent extremist. Invert the 9 to a 6, and you can kind of see external, internal. But yeah, it's a
Right.
template, 100%.
The 95 Oklahoma City bombing was a frame up of the militia movement, just as 9/11, just as the 93 World WTC bombing, and then 9/11
Wow.
was a narrative to frame up Muslims and Arabs as terrorists, right? I mean, it's all
Great
it's
points. I
all
mean, right now, the
frame up
head
of
of the
humanity, framing the whole of humanity. COVID is a frame up of the whole of humanity because there, if you don't mask and get vaxxed, you're guilty. You're a criminal.
But this
You
is a
know.
standard op, the framing up of the militias, because now you have Stuart Rhodes, founder of the Oath Keepers, who is basically painting up anybody who's a constitutionalist as now a terrorist. And they have him in quotes saying something about where's Nancy, just like that guy who broke into the Pelosi residence said. And yeah, these are operations. They created the American counterpart to Al Qaeda in the minds of the masses. That way they can do a 9/11 that the masses will believe in. And we're still waiting for the white nationalist 9/11 event, in my opinion.
Alex Jones is really deeply complicit in this script because he had Ashley Babbitt's husband on there twice, alleged husband on there twice. Don't tell me he didn't know that that thing was a sloppy special effect.
You
It
know
was a
what?
goulash
He
paint in
is
the blood.
okay. Alex Jones, one, he's had his assets frozen. Two, he's gonna have to pay $1 billion for hurt feelings. But now, Jordan Peele, who's the director of, I believe it's called Nope. It's a recent UFO invasion. Anyway, Jordan Peele has done a number of films that are like horror films. Well, right now he's releasing an audio book or an audio podcast, and it's a horror called Quiet Part Loud, and it's about a right-wing talk show host who's so extreme with hate that it causes violence or something. But basically, he
Well,
loses his
that's a
platform.
reworking of the Oliver Stone script for talk radio. Anybody ever
Interesting.
seen?
I haven't.
Yeah, starring Eric Bogosian. He really steals the show, and it's a Howard Stern type character. Um, Almost exactly modeled on Howard Stern. Have you never seen Oliver Stone's movie Talk Radio?
No.
And at the end, he gets Alan Berg. Actually, it is based on the alleged assassination of a talk radio host
Ooh, that's
named
interesting.
Alan Berg. He was out in Denver. I believe he was in Denver, Colorado. This is way back in
This
the
is a big
90s,
tie-in then,
80s
because
or 90s.
this Jordan Peele thing, Quiet Part Loud, is about the deplatforming of a hateful radio host. And if you remember, when Hicks gave Kevin Booth a script for the Limbaugh-like character that is believed to have become Jones, the script involved this host being killed at the end. But what happens to the Ellen Berg? Is it a parallel story?
You think they're going to stage an assassination of Jones?
In I would it would be in the script that Hicks gave to Kevin Booth, but supposedly the script involved one of his own fans. And I've seen this storyline played out in a couple of different shows already. Like there was one where there's this right-wing host based on Jones. I think it was in Colony, who who instigates the assassination of a senator, and then he gets hit in retaliation. But yeah, that is the subtext to the Alex Hicks George or Bill Hicks Alex Jones story. So it's interesting to me that Jordan Peele is doing a story about a Jones-like character getting
Well,
deplatformed.
that's just like Jared Kushner hiring the publicist for The Purge
Oh
to,
yes.
to come up with the PR agitprop for Trump's campaign. And I believe "Make America Great Again" was originally a slogan of Ronald Reagan's.
Oh
So it
yes.
was
It was.
never even, it was for Trump. It was never even original. He just bought. I wonder if he had to pay copyright. Really, I wonder if he had to pay a copyright fee
Well, you know,
to use Ronald Reagan's original.
when he reemerged on the world stage politically, I
And
was
Ronald Reagan was an actor, in case anybody has forgotten. He was
yes,
a Hollywood
Reagan,
actor who they made president.
Ronald
So.
Reagan, and Star Wars and all that.
Yeah,
But
right.
when Trump started emerging on the world stage, I thought, this guy seems to be rhyming his whole campaign with Reagan, make America great again. And I think even Reagan got his start. I think he even flew on one of Trump's planes. But I noticed there was a lot of intentional rhyming. Like Reagan was known for speaking, quote, above the heads of the media, talking directly to the silent majority of the people. And that's what Trump was doing with his rallies. He would call out the media, call them liars, and defer people to the online sources. Like, it looks to me like a great deal of repetition.
Yeah, I mean, clearly they modeled the whole Trump. The Trump thing was supposed to be a populist movement. We've had populist movements in America before. The original one around William Jennings Bryan ended up taking over the Democratic Party, just as Trump has sort of hijacked the Republicans, I guess, supposedly. But and to do that, you really got to start. You got to well, first of all, you have to give people a focus for their rage and their free-floating anxiety. But I got to ask you this. This is something that is kind of mystifying me a little bit. Do they allow Trump to stray off the reservation, or in fact, is he a prisoner of the vaccine narrative? Because he's really on the spot now. Many of the most enthusiastic MAGA people are anti-vaxxers, and that's because when Trump
Yeah, I
originally
think that
campaigned,
he definitely is taking credit for it. He's the vax father, and it's a huge contradiction because the
oh,
orthodoxy has been anti. But yeah, as far
have,
as
have, have you seen the Candace Owens Trump
yes,
blackballing
the
on?
beef there is pretty interesting to me as well. And Candace Owens, 33, is the wife of the CEO of Parler, and then she shows up with Kanye West and the White Lives Matter shirts, and then Kanye buys Parler. A very interesting bit of world stage theater all around here. This
Well,
Trump,
Kanye West has called out Harley Pasternak, who I guess is sort of a celebrity physical trainer out there in Hollywood, some Canadian guy.
his MK Ultra handler. Yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So to bring this up here, I find it curious to me. Kanye compared his life experience recently to the Truman Show, and I look at some of these people, like these supposed rogues, like Kanye and Trump, and I can see why it looks like they could be somewhat stray. Maybe they're going off maybe they're going off the script and they're
Or
going off
maybe
the
not.
program. But
Yeah, maybe it doesn't matter whether they're on this side or that side because both sides are controlled. It's what we call a directed dialectic. This goes back to the trust that the Bolsheviks started, organized, basically in order. The best way to control the opposition is to lead it, which is what Lenin's idea. That really they learned from the German general staff and from the British Empire how to do this. The Bolsheviks, and I have to say they deployed it very effectively. They created this phony opposition, this fake opposition called the Union of Russian Monarchists that was colloquially referred to as the Trust, mostly among emigres their political opponents in the capitals of Europe and in the United States as a sort of focal point for resistance to the Bolsheviks. Felix Dzerzhinsky, the founder of the Cheka, he was covertly instructed by Lenin to set this thing up and to pick highly trusted Bolshevik leaders to infiltrate this thing that they were creating and guide it along, to sort of convince people that there's good guys on the inside of the Bolshevik Party. And
The white hats. Yeah,
the
early.
white
That was
hats, yeah.
definitely like the white
And
hats. Hopium.
right, and this was started in 1919, and by 1920, of course, Lenin was dead by 1925, and Stalin was pretty much consolidating his control. The Bolshevik control over the trust was so covert that Stalin was never informed. Stalin didn't even know about it. And it was being run by Felix Dzerzhinsky and his second in command, Trelicer. And they were using it to control and lure in these opponents, identify them and control them, and keep them spinning their wheels on this treadmill with this hopium that there were white hats inside the party.
It worked.
Why else would the Bolsheviks allow this organization to exist in Russia unless they were really democratic? That's what people thought. But when Stalin found out about it, he was furious because he at first thought it was a legitimate opposition. And he called in, and then he found out that there were actually old Bolsheviks who were participating in it and running it. He called in to Dzerzhinsky and said, "What the hell's going on here?" And Dzerzhinsky said, "Well, Lenin instructed us to do this, and we were instructed to do it. We were supposed to keep very quiet about it, so most of the party wouldn't know that we were really controlling it, so that it would really be seen as a legitimate opposition." And Stalin said, "Look, we've consolidated. It's 1925. Why are we still following the policy of a man who's been dead like 4 years? Lenin died in like 23, I think." He says, "Why are we still following the policy of a dead man? I'm in charge now. And we no longer have to disguise who we are and what we stand for. Power is power. We don't have to conceal it."
It did work, you're
and
right.
Stalin ordered,
They did in fact recreate Operation Trust very well, and Parlor, which I just mentioned.
QAnon.
Well, yeah, exactly. But before the 1-6...
Well, MAGA and QAnon, of course, really.
Yes,
the whole
yes.
Trump thing is a controlled opposition.
It's all part of it, and he's the Judas goat. And if you look at Parler, which Kanye is buying, right in the lead up to 1-6, that was one of the main sites, the alternative Twitter, where everything was being planned before they rug pulled it by taking its servers and pulling it off Apple and Google. But to get onto Parler, you had to give your phone number and upload your driver's license to get an approved account.
Elon Musk's new version of Twitter.
Oh yes, yeah, the
you got to give them
controlled demo there. But I'm like, wait a minute here. All these people on the right who are insurrection friendly are giving their information, their driver's licenses, their phone numbers to Parler, and then it gets, quote, hacked. And I'm like, okay, I'm in that hack. Whoever hacked it has my info. And I was fine with that because I'm doing journalism and doing research. I have to go into these places. But what an obvious setup. Because now anybody who's interested in an insurrection or in fomenting that kind of delay of the proceedings, well, they know your name and number and address.
Stalin, let me tell you the bottom line on this. Stalin was so, he had a big ego. He was so furious when he discovered that this was really being run by the Bolsheviks. He said, what are we doing, allowing these people to operate inside our new Soviet Union? They're trying to overthrow us. What are we allowing this to? And Dzerzhinsky came in and explained to him what the original design of it was. Stalin was furious that he had been left out of the loop on this. And he said, "I want all of them rounded up and shot." And Dzerzhinsky said, "Well, wait a minute, you can't do this because a lot of them, the ones running it, are some of our most loyal old-time Bolsheviks. You're going to order their execution?" And his second in command, Trelister, came in and said, "Well, you might as well put my name at the top of that list because I'm not going to let this happen. These are all our comrades that you're about to shoot for being part of this fake opposition." And Stalin said, he said, "I'm going to have them all shot. I'm going to cross your name off." And he did. He used it as a pretext to get rid of a lot of old Bolsheviks who were covertly it's so crazy when you look at it, but that's what they will do. That's what they'll do to the left, the Antifa types and the BLM types when they're done with them.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you were to, I mean, look at Antifa and Patriot Front, and tell me the Patriot Front isn't just the right-wing Antifa. And one of the clues here is the founder of the Patriot Front is named Thomas Rousseau. The name Rousseau is synonymous with the French Revolution, and we're looking
Yeah,
at,
right.
but I'm like
Right.
Antifa, Patriot Front, show me the difference. And they all wear masks. How convenient.
Well, this leads me to wonder whether Trump, in fact, has allowed some of these authentic followers who were there on January 6th to be rotting in solitary confinement for the last 2 years when he could have pardoned all of them. Really, he had enough time to pardon all of them. But whether he's allowing them to be... See, you say they're all crisis actors, but I don't think every one of them is. I think they've managed to identify, track, and round up a lot of people who are sort of genuine opponents of the New World Order in their kind of naive way, who were lured into this January 6th operation.
Oh, look, they could have
And
provoked
Trump
people
is
into
allowing them
breaking.
to be sacrificed.
Yes,
Trump allowed them to be sacrificed.
yes, you could have a number of people who, of their own volition, would break laws, collude, and get themselves entrapped. This was a huge honeypot, I think. I just think that the main action was actors, and I think it was more feds. I think, but yeah, obviously there could have been some
Yeah,
people.
Ray Epps definitely was there telling people to go inside. He's an FBI guy.
And I think that I think Baked Alaska's a Fed. I really
Yes,
do. I think
yes.
it's a Fed saying,
Yeah, and
"Hey,
also
don't."
Gavin McGinnis, also another one of these.
Gavin, Gavin
a
McSmollett. Gavin McSmollett,
Yeah,
I've dubbed him.
he's a Fed for sure. And are you familiar with Hitler's Night of the Long Knives?
Yes.
Right. So this is where these were some of the oldest and most loyal. These are the street fighters of the NSDAP. The brown shirts, Ernst Röhm and his people. They really did a lot of the street fighting on the road to power, beginning from 1923 right on up till the National Socialists finally, in a coalition, got voted into power in 1933, and the army, the old Reich army generals who were aristocrats, they didn't like these street brawling types. And many of whom were veterans of World War I, by the way. Rome and his crew were had been soldiers in World War I, but they were very radical, and they were socialist. They were super socialist. They wanted to have a second revolution. They said, "We're in power now. Go ahead and nationalize all the banks, and we're going to abolish, capitalism and have a true national socialism." They really believed in national socialism. And Himmler basically needed the agreement of the German General Staff to the National Socialists consolidating their power. But the price that the German General Staff demanded and the regular army run by Junkers, aristocratic officers, demanded was the elimination of this wild card, these old-time National Socialist brown shirts, street fighters. And Hitler had them all, and also Ernst Röhm and his crowd they were super homosexual. they would have these gay orgies and stuff like that, and Hitler had always overlooked this. He said he didn't care about that.
Well, Patriot Front is all male, and Proud Boys. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, there may be
Gay
something.
element there, huh?
Well, it may be some kind of, I don't know, some kind of thing. I'm not sure exactly, but these are definitely patterned. and I think they're all pretty much spooks. I mean, they're all feds. When the Patriot Front was revealed, there were 33 of them jumping out of the back of a U-Haul, very dramatic. Well, it turns out that they were feds, according to one of the police there. He said, "Oh, some of those guys were insiders; they were agents." And it's like, well, how many of the 33 were agents, and how many were dupes? I'm inclined to
Dupes.
think it's like pretty much all of them are on the inside.
See, I think there are dupes, and I think these dupes are sacrificed. Just as the Bolsheviks sacrificed, just as Stalin was perfectly willing to sacrifice all these loyal Bolsheviks who are pretending to be opponents of the regime in this.
Well, sure, we have seen, like here, we've observed and noted the use of parolees, people scraped off the bottom of the worst
Right.
places in the prisons and put to use in disinformation and limited
Well,
hangout. Yep.
Daryl Brooks, the Waukesha crazy SUV driver, because apparently he had an extensive criminal record, and for petty shit. But they may actually be using him in this way. I don't want to. I don't
Look,
want to
it
rush
wouldn't
to
surprise
judgment.
me. It wouldn't surprise me, but like Homeland Security admitted that they were trying to manufacture terrorists for Trump out of Antifas. And it could be that they instigate and they have actors, a mixture of both. But yeah, and someone even pointed out here uh, that there's a good likelihood that Trump is allowing real fans to become martyrs for him.
If you were Robbie Parker, would you want? And they said, "Hey, we need you to show up at the Alex to testify for this Alex Jones trial." And Robbie Parker's already, to me, he's completely useless. He's already compromised by that famous video of him laughing and hyperventilating as he gets ready to play his role.
Only to critical
Wouldn't you want
thinkers.
to drop out? I mean, wouldn't you want, if you were a crisis actor or Wayne Sexton, after a while, after you've been in so many of these things, or after you'd kind of been exposed, wouldn't you want to like fade away and disappear, like Seth Rich, or wouldn't you just like want to disappear? I mean, you wouldn't want to
I
keep
think
showing
so
up
too.
again and again and
But
again,
like,
unless you were so compromised you had no choice but to do everything they told you to do.
yeah, or your character. Like I look at somebody like Kyle Rittenhouse, and the amount of hate directed toward him, I would have thought that he would have gone witness protection, especially right after Kenosha. But instead, he becomes kind of a Steven Crowder light, some kind of annoying right-wing jester, media figure. And I'm thinking
You know
that's
who's
the
really,
opposite of what you would expect for
you know who's really broken this down? Russ Winter of Winter Watch. I mean, you got to see if he'll. You could do an interview with him. Maybe he'll agree. Of course, he probably doesn't like flat earthers. I don't know how he feels about alternative cosmology. A lot of people, I'm finding this
Well, I
among
don't know how I
people.
feel about CGI ball earthers these days. It's kind of two ways, but maybe we can meet in the middle.
You're right. You're right. I agree with you. I agree with you. Regardless of where you stand on this, people should be open. Once we know that NASA's so full of shit, we don't know what the hell's up with cosmology. I have my own
I
worldview
know
on
who you're
this.
talking
But
about, though. I know who you're talking about. You sent me something from him
okay,
where
have you?
he broke down in nuance the various faces of Joe Biden and how it's just crazy when you really get down to it, how many
Right.
different versions there are.
That's not all he's done. He's thoroughly deconstructed what you were just talking about, the Darrell Brooks Waukesha thing, and what
Yeah,
was the other?
Kyle.
I mean, Kyle Rittenhouse. He has really done a total breakdown, showing how Kyle Rittenhouse is an actor, and is completely scripted, and like Kyle Rittenhouse saying he likes BLM. You remember that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I mean, he has a whole explanation for that, how it plays into the narrative, and I
Kyle,
really,
I mean, 17-year-old white hat front row at a Trump rally before the Kenosha thing.
yeah, yeah. And Russ Winter I think, has done a very detailed analysis of a lot of these things, and I feel like he's on the same page with us. I really do. But shoot him an email or say, hey, I've had requests to interview you.
I find that,
um,
look, I mean, I would never say that I'm a flat earther or whatever. I mean, just like I wouldn't say I'm a globe earther. I have my reasons,
right.
but whenever I'm
I call
approaching,
myself a globe Earth skeptic.
yeah, skeptic,
I'm a
shape
globe Earth skeptic.
agnostic, but when I approach somebody who might be put off by that, I generally try to send them a list of questions in advance so they know where the
Okay.
conversation's going. I'm not trying to entrap somebody into any sort of tangents, but I'm very interested in media deconstructionism as a methodology, and I like to see what conclusions others have arrived at with how they analyze things.
Yes. I know that there are probably people out there that get cold feet when they have to, in terms of the whole notion of alternative cosmologies, because they're so used to, it's been so ground into them, this whole Copernican, Keplerian, geocentric model, which really is, it's nowhere near as precise as Tycho Brahe's geocentric model. Really, in terms of data, the data supports Tycho Brahe's geocentric model for sure, where the Earth is stationary and everything's rotating, up there, and the sky clock is basically sort of rotating around the Earth, as we call it.
Well, most
Um,
people get
but
stuck at this. They get stuck at why would they fake it? And here's my answer. My short answer is even if they're not faking the shape, if they're not representing it to us accurately, if they're giving us a misrepresentation, they could be hiding land. And why would that matter? Well, all of their computer models for their climate science it's all predicated on the Earth as represented. And if they're misrepresenting it, any aspect of it, it throws these models out. And I think we haven't been given a complete enough picture. There's enough room for doubt that to me, that's why it matters. It matters because a false worldview leads to false conclusions.
exactly. But that doesn't mean you have to start out with a conclusion. You can keep an open mind and be skeptical, and say which model is predictive modeling can be tested. Of course, when you talk about the star clock and Polaris and all that, we do have a few thousand years of records and data that it can be the basis for studying this. But to me, what I see in the sky is nothing more than an optical effect. It's you know you can be at the beach and get sunburned in the water because the reflection of the sun. You can be wearing a hat or an umbrella and still get sunburned from the reflection of the sun on the water. But the sun is still it's an optical effect that generates heat. There's no doubt about that. But if I'm looking at a lake at a reflection of the sun or the moon on a body of water, well, how do I know that what I'm looking out there in the sky is not simply a refraction or a reflection of something else? I don't necessarily know that it's a real object unless
Right.
I got a piece of it in my hand. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, it's an optical effect. That's all we can say about what's in the sky. The stars, the so-called planets, the celestial objects, the constellations, the moon,